Welcome back to our 6th mini lecture for the urinary system. I am going to try and get through the rest of this objective, and we'll see how that goes. There's a little bit left. I'm going to start with just a quick review of our blood flow, so hopefully you've taken a little bit of time to sort of map that out on your own, but if not, this is what you should end up looking like. Taking a look at our entire renal circulation, we could actually start over here in the aorta. The aorta is going to send blood into the renal artery. Renal artery is going to, what's a good color here? Let's try green. Renal artery is going to divide. Where it divides, it's going to become segmental arteries. The segmental arteries then divide into smaller, finer blood vessels. Those are going to be our interlobar. Interlobar then sort of branch out over top of these pyramids and become arcuate. Off of the arcuate arteries, we're going to get these sort of fine sunshine ray-like little arteries. Those are called, I'm going to actually cross this out and put cortical radiate so that we are consistent. Cortical radiate arteries. Off of the cortical radiate arteries, so if we actually move over to this image, we can see our arcuate artery here arching over the top of that renal pyramid, and then off of that we're going to get our cortical radiate artery. So we get this really nice little small blood vessel. Branching off of that, we're going to get our afferent arterioles. So here's an afferent arteriole. That afferent arteriole then branches into all of these very, very small capillaries. That's the glomerulus, that ball of yarn capillary bed. From the glomerulus out the other side there, we're going to get that efferent arteriole. Okay, that efferent arteriole is then going to lead to either paratubular capillaries or the vasa recta. These over here are two different nephrons. So this is what we call a cortical nephron, and then over here we have a juxtamedullary nephron. The difference between paratubular capillaries and vasa recta is determined by whether we're in a cortical nephron or a juxtamedullary nephron. So here in the cortical nephron, what you'll see is the second capillary bed is all in the cortex tissue, so all above the top of this pyramid. That makes this a paratubular capillary bed. Whereas over here, we have a capillary bed that actually dips down into that pyramid. This is called the vasa recta. Okay, and they're actually just associated with different regions of our nephron itself. So we will see the differences between those two as we move forward, but I did want to point out that this efferent arteriole is either going to go to this paratubular capillary or it's going to branch off and serve this vasa recta capillary bed. Both of them are capillary beds. Both of these are examples of portal systems. It's just where that second capillary bed is located is different between these two types of nephrons. So then from that second capillary bed, we are going to merge into or dump our blood back into our cortical radiate veins. Again, you should cross this interlobar lobular off and change that to cortical radiate. Cortical radiate veins are going to then pool into arcuate, arcuate into interlobar, and if you wanted to, like I said, for the sake of consistency, you could add in your segmental veins down here as well. So segmental veins into the renal vein and then out into the inferior vena cava. And that is blood flow. Like I said, practice it a few times, get comfortable and familiar with. Just very quickly, also associated with the kidney, we do have innervation. So we have nerves that come from both the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system. When, and we're not going to get too deep into this, but they do wrap sort of around the renal artery and they do enter the kidney at that hilus area. The sympathetic innervation has these effects on urine production. So it reduces glomerular blood flow. Ultimately, what this does is reduces our filtration. When we have reduced filtration, we produce less urine. And they do also help regulate blood pressure. Okay, parasympathetic innervation, we know less about what it does, so we don't talk about it as much when it comes to the urinary system. Okay, here is the part in this lecture where we start getting into our functional units, which are our nephrons, like I mentioned before. The nephrons are going to be the part of the kidney that is actually producing the urine. Let me see up here. I'm going to write each kidney is going to have about 1.2 million nephrons. So we have tons and tons of nephrons. When we have kidney damage or kidney failure, we actually can lose function in more than half of these nephrons before we even really begin to exhibit a lot of symptoms of kidney disease or disorder. So tons of nephrons, healthy kidneys can very easily keep up with the workload. We can actually continue to have sort of healthy kidney function, if you want to think of it that way, or at least adequate kidney function if the nephrons have started to sort of die off. So we have to have really substantial nephron death or damage before we begin to see the impacts of kidney disease. So let's talk a little bit about what the nephrons look like. So what is their anatomy? They are going to be composed of two units. So I'll put this over here. One of the units is called the renal corpuscle and the other is called the renal tubule. So the renal corpuscle is going to be the part of the nephron that is involved in filtering, where the renal tubule is actually going to be producing urine. So renal corpuscle is filtering the blood. We are making a filtrate at that point. The renal tubule is going to take that product, so it's going to take the filtrate from the renal corpuscle and it's going to go through a series of processes that converts that into urine. The renal corpuscle has two pieces or two components. One is the glomerulus and the other is the glomerular capsule. The glomerular capsule has a visceral component, intercapsular space, and then a parietal component. So there are multiple layers here, and I'm going to point these all out right now. So let's take a look at what we already know. Right here we have our afferent arteriole, so that's going to be that little tiny blood vessel that's bringing blood into the nephron, so into our functional unit. It's heading towards the glomerulus. Here, sort of shown in this goldeny color, that is the glomerulus, so that's our ball of yarn capillary. This is a fenestrated capillary, so it has some pretty big fenestration pores in it. Wrapped around the outside of this capillary, so right in here you can see that endothelial layer of the capillary, those simple squamous cells. You'll notice that there's actually another layer of cells on top of that. That layer are called podocytes. Podocytes are basically these little cells, or pretty big cells really, that have these sort of leg-like extensions, and they form part of our filtration membrane. So they wrap around the blood vessels, and that is going to be the visceral layer of the glomerular capsule. So let me sort of write this in here. Okay, and it's visceral because it's actually touching the organ. The organ that we're talking about here is the glomerulus. We then have a whole bunch of intercapsular space. So all of this in here is going to be able to fill with fluid that's being filtered out of the blood vessels and into the glomerular capsule. The second layer is going to be here. This is our parietal layer. And it is also simple squamous epithelium. So it forms sort of that actual enclosing capsule piece. The other thing that I wanted to write on here is we do have a vascular pole. So this sort of, I don't know how to bracket this off. This is our vascular pole. This is where our blood vessels come into, and this is our efferent arteriole moving out of that glomerulus. This side over here is called the urinary pole. And so this is going to be the side of the glomerular capsule, or the renal corpuscle, that is actually headed out into the tubule and is going to start the process of urine production. So the renal tubule is then going to be made of 4 regions. They are, I know that this is going to be on the next slide, but I actually want to end on this slide. So the proximal convoluted tubule, the nephron loop, the distal convoluted tubule, and then the collecting duct. These three are part of the nephron. This last one is not part of the nephron. So just to be very obvious about that piece. The nephron ends at the division between the distal convoluted tubule and the collecting duct. Okay, so I know that the first 5 lectures were all at least 15 minutes, so I'm going to stop here before we get into all of the different components of the renal tubule and make that sort of a new and distinct lecture so that we're not getting overwhelmed at this point. So I am done for this. I will come back and talk to you a little bit later.